All right, we're taping this on Thursday morning. Seth Wickersham is here from ESPN. He's popped on here a few times to talk about big picture NFL shenanigans at the coach owner scale and other stuff, and the Patriots and Belichick. Shockingly, to a lot of people, goes back to college. You wrote about it for ESPN today. I don't really even know where to begin, but I guess I'll start here. People see this story however they feel about Belichick is my takeaway. And I'm just judging it from the people in my life who are emailing about it. The people who love Belichick think he's a great coach. Like, I can't believe there was another NFL job for him. The people who are done with his style of doing, thought he was a little overrated, are all like, see, nobody in the NFL wanted him. And the truth is, this story really hits both sides of that spectrum, right?
There's no doubt. And I think that what makes that interesting is that that reflects a lot of the coach, GM, and owner divide in the NFL. I mean, I think that rank and file coaches, ask Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Sean Payton, ask any of those guys if they think Bill Belichick should be coaching in the NFL, and you won't even be able to finish the sentence before they say yes. Whereas at the GM level, though, and the ownership level, there's just so much concern. And I think that part of it is his record. Part of it is, that for, the last half of the dynasty, certainly, Robert Kraft made no secret that he could be impossible to work with at times, even as they were winning. But I think that there's just a sense that even if Belichick is willing to be deferential to existing infrastructures and existing GMs, whoever they might be, there's a sense that if you hire this guy, you got to kind of let him do it his way and give him the keys, even if he's not technically asking for it. And I think what changed, 2024 has been an interesting year for Belichick, and we should talk about that. But what changed, I think, was that he began to think, maybe I don't really want this, and I don't want to take the risk and wait in January, hoping that I might get one interview and might get one job when I can go to a program that I've got a little bit of history with, have the space to win or lose on my terms, and end my career that way.
All right, so there's two major things to unpack there.
Mm-hmm.
One is, how do I even know if I'll get a job in January? And then the other piece is, how do I know I want the job? So let's talk about the league dynamics, because I think that's such a big part of this. He had such a bad experience with the Crafts the last 5 to 7 years, really starting with the stuff you were writing about in the mid-2010s that I think, and I was one of them, a lot of the Patriot fans who had gone through Deflategate and Spygate, and then people were starting to write about the dissension between Kraft and Belichick and Brady, and all of us were like, fuck you, there's no dissension, we're fine. But then as the years pass, clearly there was. But I think the Crafts thing got so dysfunctional the last 5 years. And if you didn't believe it, you just had to watch the Apple doc, which was one of the most insane pieces of sports content anyone's ever released, where it was just an absolute hatchet job that tried to erase Belichick, especially from the first 3 Super Bowls, where I don't care where you stand on the Belichick versus Brady thing. Belichick was a bigger reason they won the first 3 Super Bowls. It's a fact. The way he put the roster together, the defense he had, the game planning. And it was almost like they knew that, so they had to steer it toward everything that happened after that. And part of me wonders, was he just so disenchanted with his experience with the Crafts that as he looked around the available jobs and you see father-son duo, incompetent franchise, father-son duo, and he's just looking around going, that looks awful. I was already in that situation. Maybe I could have control over my own situation. So just the NFL infrastructure, which you've written about a lot, is it more dysfunctional than we even know about? Because there's maybe 7 franchises that are run smoothly and correctly, and then 2/3 of the league at least are kind of a disaster?
Totally. And I think that, it's first of all, to go back to the early part of the dynasty, you and I talked about it when my Patriots book came out. I mean, those were hugely formative years because Belichick finally had the people, the quarterback in place to do what he had in his mind for so long in terms of being able to create an actual team. And, that's where that ethos started. And I think that Wright Thompson and I and Van Natta reported on it a year ago or so, that Belichick really felt like the Krafts had eroded what he had built in the past couple of years. Krafts, of course, were pissed off that he let Brady walk out, and he told Kraft that Brady couldn't play anymore, and he goes wins the Super Bowl. But then, 2024, he gets fired by the Krafts, even though they call it a mutual parting of ways. Kraft later comes out and says that he was fired.
Well, and he was also telling everyone in NFL circles, like, yeah, I fired him.
Exactly. And then you have 7 openings, and only one team shows any interest in him. He meets with the owner twice. And then the next thing he's voted off the island, as we reported about. And
you're talking about Atlanta.
And he was willing to work with GM Terry Fontenot. He was willing to work with Rich McKay, even though there's a lot of history there.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, they not only went with Raheem Morris, but they made a decision against Belichick. Didn't finish in any of the decision makers' top 3 candidates, and
they leaked it too to make them look bad, which I thought was really interesting.
It was our reporting. I mean, it's a little bit different than they leaked it, but we learned
true,
about it.
You're right.
Yes.
But you were reporting it, you're finding out that
totally.
They weren't in the top 3. So they're telling
absolutely.
Somebody
so he gets shut out. Then you have the dynasty comes out, which just, really roundly dismisses his influence, in that team's historic run. So start this season. He's got his media gigs, but every week he and a lot of the old Patriots assistants who are also out of work would do these Zooms, and they would go through every team, every game, every situation, these high-level conversations. And I think the subtext of it all is what teams and organizations sound good for us if the situation comes up. And there wasn't a lot of back-channel communication with owners. I think that the Brian Flores lawsuit has impacted that greatly.
Wait, can you explain that? Because that's such a crucial piece of this. So 5 years ago, there's texting, there's, hey, what's going on over there? And you're just back-channeling constantly. And the Flores thing just completely ended that?
Well, it's an ongoing discrimination lawsuit against the league and 3 teams. And I think that owners, don't want to get wrapped up in that. They don't want to be part of that. They don't want to violate the Rooney Rule. And so I'm not convinced that Belichick wouldn't have ended up with an NFL job. I just think we're never going to know. And I think that the ones that he thought he might have a chance at just didn't seem appealing enough. And I think that on those Zoom calls, midway through the season, all of a sudden the college game just seemed much more appealing to him. And he wanted to discuss certain programs, how it would work if they tried to implement some of the Patriot way at that level. And again, I was as shocked as anybody. I think you and I were texting about it when North Carolina, came up. It's not Notre Dame exactly, but he felt like this is a good place to end his career the way that he wants to end his career, which is, working with people that he cares about, that he likes, and winning or losing on his terms.
Well, and he has a little bit of a father legacy with them. It's a great place to live. It's a place that seems like they were willing to give him the car keys. I want to go through those NFL jobs, though, because it's such a crucial piece of this. Because there's going to be a narrative the league rejected him. And even your piece tapped into that. Did Belichick reject the league first, or did they already reject him? But if you go through the jobs, Las Vegas, assuming that becomes open after the year. I mean, they have 2 wins, but I'm just guessing. Well, Mark Davis fired McDaniels. He's a legacy kid. That's a franchise that's never, I would say, been stable the last decade. So he's not going there. Jacksonville, which
and
the team I
west.
thought.
I don't think I think consistently he really didn't want to go out west.
Well, and also they don't have a quarterback. There's so many variables, so cross them up. Jacksonville is the team I thought made the most sense. But what do they have? They have the father-son duo who's been pretty incompetent over the last 10 years. He just dealt with that with the Krafts. Now he's getting the more incompetent version of the Krafts. Trevor Lawrence, you'd have to really talk yourself into. And it would have to be a situation where they just gave him everything. But they've already proven they don't really work that way. The son runs the analytics department. And it just seems like that wasn't a match. So cross them off. New Orleans, no quarterback. The Benson family, they're a mess. He's not going there. They're in cap hell. You can't succeed there. That makes no sense. Cross them off. The Jets, no quarterback, and he can't stand Woody Johnson. Took shots at him constantly all the way during the season and all his media places. So cross them off. The Giants were interesting because I thought that was another possibility. But it's pretty clear that he really likes Dayball. And even in some of the reporting was like telling them like, you guys need a better front office, but you have a good coach. He just didn't want to shank Dayball. So that's out. Plus they don't have a QB. Dallas, we won't know until January, right? That's another father-son duo, by the way, but won't know until January. And he couldn't wait that long because this North Carolina job was either going to be there or not. So let that one go. And then the only other one I can think of before the one that you talked about in your piece, Cincinnati, if this ended badly, they didn't make the playoffs and they fire Zach Taylor, who has not covered himself in glory this year. That's a really good job because you have Burrow, Ohio. But again, you can't wait till January. So the only one that really might have made sense was Chicago. And in your reporting, they seemed receptive to that one, right? But Chicago's just, they want one of those offensive whiz kid play callers. Everybody has Ben Johnson linked to them already. So it just didn't seem like a fit. And that was the one team that seems like they've rejected him kind of.
Yeah. And I mean, again, what are those situations is interesting. I mean, that Dallas is interesting to me because nobody can take a collection of talent and turn them into a team quite like Belichick. But again, can the Jones share the spotlight with someone like Belichick? I have no doubt that they could all get along, but I don't know if Jerry Jones values coaches enough to, go after someone like Bill. And
he had Jason Garrett for 8 years or 9 years. So we know the answer to that already.
Exactly. And so I think that, like, again, he saw the Giants as a rebuild, but he also believes that Brian Daboll's done a good job. And so almost like you take yourself out of the running for that if they were even considering it. And, again, this is all just, I think that, like, and even Cincinnati, I mean, remember when he would go on his podcast or on the McAfee show, I mean, he was really critical of Burrow. And usually when he does that publicly, that there's a lot more there in terms of his private scouting report of a certain player.
So were you devouring some of the Belichick media stuff? Because you know him so well and trying to just like the little breadcrumbs he was dropping one way or the other. Was that like a sport for you?
I loved it. It was really fun. It was really fun. I mean, that's all we've wanted, right? Because what you have is for all these decades, you had his public performance, which was, very buttoned up. And then the things you would learn about what they were like behind the scenes and the way that they would really, put so much thought into like all these decisions. It was just mind blowing. And so I loved like just getting a glimpse of that this year from him.
And especially like his disdain for certain things was really funny. Like sloppy special teams, just like really, really cut him to the heart.
I interviewed. I was talking with Peyton Manning earlier this year for my quarterbacks book. And, he was talking about how Belichick just loves coming on the Manning cast and loves watching punts.
Right. Yeah, like Belichick, if there was a punt near the end zone and the guy screwed it up and fell into the end zone, it was like Belichick was being electroshocked on the sidelines. It was
absolutely
the worst thing that could happen to him is somebody screwing up a basic play.
And then you watched him when we had an Atlanta game, and I think he was on the Manning cast, and he's just ripping them for sloppy tackling and things like that. And that was a job. Obviously, they made a point of making sure everyone knew why they didn't hire him. And so, I enjoyed that stuff quite a bit.
Yeah, he seemed like he had an axe to grind against Atlanta. The Jets, he couldn't take Woody Johnson shots enough. There are a couple others, but I'm torn on this because I really thought him trying to be the coach, GM, everything the last couple years, which just wasn't sustainable anymore, and he wasn't good at it. The free agent draft stuff the last 5 years, he was just bad. And you could see the results in the roster. He just didn't do a very good job. And that combined with, I think he had a lot of trouble replenishing assistants. Once guys got plucked left and right, that becomes really hard to just keep replenishing these guys that you kind of taught your whole system to. You get older, you don't have the same kind of motor. So, the way he did it in the 2000s, no chance he was going to be able to do that again. But I still feel like he was a pretty good pretty like top, maybe not top 7 coach, but in the top 10. What was interesting about last year, the team got sloppy in ways that were really uncharacteristic for Belichick. And I do think people around the league probably noticed that. This wasn't like the same buttoned up overachieving thing. Now, their defense overachieved and finished like, I think, 6th in DVOA. Some of that had to do with the schedule. Some of that had to do with when you're playing a shit team, you're not necessarily throwing the kitchen sink at them. You're just trying to get through the game. Some of it was smoke and mirrors, but at the same time, the team did overachieve. They were awful offensively. They couldn't have been worse. And the reason I bring this up is the irony of all of this is the best job for him, I think, would have been the Patriots for 2025 with like some pieces desperately needed, like a stable hand, and they have an awesome quarterback, right? Which is the thing he didn't have for 6 years. And the funniest thing about all of this is that was the perfect job for him, but it never would have happened.
Never would have happened. So there was definitely no chance. And I think that
although Ben and J-Lo happened, so maybe no chance is too strong. There have been reunions that have been shot. The Eagles got back together, but that one would have been an all-time shocker, I think.
I know. I'm trying to think if there's. I mean, you just look at the toxicity of how that ended, and I don't know if there's a sports parallel where they could have like mended that again. I mean,
Phil Jackson, Jerry Krause is the only thing I could think of.
I was thinking about that, and that just wasn't gonna. I mean, it got pretty bad. I mean, you saw the body language at the press conference when they let Belichick go. You saw it at the Brady roast.
The roast was the best. He just had complete disdain. He couldn't hide it.
Couldn't hide it. And yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like on paper, in terms of like if you're looking at the situation that's kind of best suited for him, where you're taking a team that, again, needs to kind of like come together and play smarter. That might be, the Patriots might be his forte, but yeah, that was never going to happen this year.
Yeah, because he looked like Sean Payton. They give him the car keys in Denver, turns it around. Now he's younger than Belichick. Harbaugh with the Chargers this year, same thing. Like there's probably 7, 8 guys that could do that, but in those cases, those guys are also running a lot of the front office thinking. And I think Belichick, with his last 5 years, probably lost that. With the perfect job would have been, hey, we have a good team. We ran our course with our coach. Can you just come in? That's why Philly became super interesting in September for a couple weeks there when it looked like Sirianni was going to go badly. And that was like, whoever's taking that one, that's like a hired gun job. Could he just come in, hired gun, hey, just try to win as many games as possible and compete for titles? But then Philly turned it around. They won 9 to 10 games. So it makes sense to me that he did this because I do think he just wants to coach, and maybe he started to realize the NFL isn't for him. Now, on the other hand, could he do this for 2 years and then realize, oh, that job's open, and all of a sudden he's hopping back? Do you think the Shula record's important to him? Because I've heard different takes on this.
I think it is important, but it's not the thing. It's not why he gets out of bed in the morning. It's not what really motivates him. And I think that like, probably given a year off, he was able to reflect a little bit on like, what are the essential things that I enjoy about this job? And I think that like, one of the things with the New York Giants, let's say he had gone there and he knows that it's going to take a year to get that team back. He would have been going through his 3rd straight coaching year. So 22, 23, and then next year with, the media on him, and whether he's lost his fastball, a daily, piece of speculation and content. And I don't think he really wanted to deal with that. And I think that like, it's one of the, college football media is a little different than the NFL. And I think that like, even though it's intense in its own ways, like that's something that he won't really have to contend with, I think, when he's at North Carolina.
So the things working against him, the Crafts poison the well. GM performance last 5 to 6 years was just bad. A known curmudgeon, which he tried his hardest over this with the 8 media jobs he had to really try to prove that he wasn't. And I'm in the camp that he's probably more entertaining than a curmudgeon, but I think if he's working for you and you're just a rich guy who wants answers, he's going to be a curmudgeon. brings a lot of like people that come with him. Some would say they're cast-offs. Some would say they're people that, if it was for Belichick, would not be working in the league anymore. But he has a lot of those people, right? And the irony of it is, this is the same kind of thing he probably despises with owners. Like, why do I have to deal with your family? Why do I have to deal with your, now your son's telling me what to do? But this North Carolina situation he's gonna be in. He's gonna bring a lot of like his family with him, including actual family members. So, and but it seems like to me that was probably a huge piece of this for him, just working with people that he trusts and likes, right?
Absolutely. And I think that like that was something that a year ago when the Eagles, were at the highest levels, were talking about, hey, look, he's available. Do we make a move here? That was one of the things that was considered, is that like, even though those group of minds for the longest time were just like so desired in NFL circles, right? I mean, owners just could not wait to try to tap into his thinking until they realized, that it's so singular. His system is not a playbook like Bill Walsh's. It's literally his decision making in real time. He did. They thought, he doesn't necessarily have the best record of developing coaches, and considering if he comes in, you have to kind of let him run it his way. Yeah. Are you doing this again in 2 years? Are you blowing up the building again? Or do you give someone a third shot at being, a head coach, or, one of the people out of that group, a second shot at being a head coach? And so those things were definitely on minds. I think that like with Belichick, just him having been in the NFL for half a century now and been in the public eye really for most of the last 30 or so years, is that there's just enough material out there that if you want to lay out a convincing conversation as to why you don't want to hire him, it's there. Yeah. But his record is also there. And I mean, just imagine him going through what he went through last January and February, and then having to go on his podcast and on the McAfee show and everything and explain to us, and him trying to do it politely, just how stupid some of the coaching is in the NFL. I mean, when they have to bring him on to explain what happened at the end of the Bears-Lions game.
Right.
And I mean, this is stuff that he knows how to do in his sleep. I mean, he is the one who, with the clock, melting down against the Seahawks, saw confusion, saw a personnel change, calls, goal line 3. I think that was the name of it. Butler goes in. All that stuff comes together in a way that I can't ever see being replicated again. So much preparation and thought and execution and stones, for lack of a better word. And yet, you're watching these coaches screw up game situations all the time. And they bring him on to try to explain why. And these are the guys who have jobs right now.
Right. Well, this NBA has the same problem. If you have between those two, there's 62 franchises, NBA, NFL. Probably 3/4 of them are terrible at hiring coaches. And in the NBA, coaches just change all the time. The NFL coaches change all the time. We see situations like last year where Eberflus clearly, that was going to be risky to bring him back with a new QB. That could have gone either way. Salah looked like he'd already run his course with the Jets. They talked themselves into bringing him back. But a lot of the times you can kind of see it just from not being attached, just from watching your TV, being like, that guy seems like a man. Like Brandon Staley last year. It's like this, there's no way. There's no path out of this. So I'm sure Belichick watches that too. And he's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, really?
Absolutely. And I think it was a year ago, there was they have owners meetings, and then they have the privilege meeting, which is just owners and, maybe they're family members, but it's not team executives. And I think that it was in a privilege session where the league presented some data as to the total amount of money that owners are paying coaches that are no longer working for them. And it was a staggering amount. And, then it prompted all this discussion about the value of coaches. Are we paying these guys too much? All this stuff. But the bottom line is that, like, most owners are not good at this. And even if you're invested in a GM, like, I don't want to pick on him, but let's just say Terry Fontenot or whoever it might be. Why not have an owner who says, look, I'm keeping you around. I want you to absorb as much as you can from this guy while we have 2 to 3 years with him so that we can take the best pieces going forward after he sets the record and, rides off into the sunset. Like that would be some really strategic thinking on an owner's part. And
yeah, but Seth,
the
you know how
owners,
this works. The rich guys just call each other. And then, they weirdly look out for each other, even though they're all competing against each other in this league. And there's no way that Arthur Blank didn't call Kraft to ask for his take on Belichick. I just refuse to believe he didn't. And there's no way Kraft didn't give him a bad review. So then if
we
you're
reported
Blank,
on it.
You have this, if you're Blank, you have a franchise that's worth $7 billion. And you're trying to think, do I want to give the car keys to the $7 billion franchise to this guy? And his last employer is just absolutely like smashing him. You're going to hesitate and you're going to go to the yes man. Because this is the other thing. Lombardi and I talked about this when he was on, I think in August, September. You have a lot of people in these organizations, and I've dealt with this professionally too, job protection people, that their job is just to keep their own job. And they're always going to like push blame on other people and undermine other people because that's how they're going to keep their seat. And that happens in so many of these football. We just saw it happen with the Falcons. The Cousins Penix thing is probably a disaster, right? Are there going to be repercussions for it? They're just going to blame other people. Well, Cousins, he didn't tell us he was healthy. They'll figure out how to blame and keep going. Rob Pelinka is the master of this with the Lakers. They fire a coach every year. They've traded all their picks. They've done everything, but somehow everybody else gets blamed for it. So I just think that's such a big part of sports now. And I don't think the common person who just roots for football sees it.
And owners, you bring up two interesting points. I mean, number one is that a lot of them are kind of risk averse and conflict averse,
right?
Which I think, within that context, it makes you realize just, how ballsy it was for Robert Kraft to trade a first-round pick for Belichick back in 2000.
Right, which is his Hall of Fame case, by the way. It's like he not only hired Belichick, he traded a first-round pick. He was that convinced in the guy.
Absolutely. And then the thing is, though, is that you're right. I mean, like groupthink takes over. Like even though these guys are, in charge of these multi-billion-dollar businesses, and even though they're all bosses in their own right of whatever other businesses they might own, like when you see votes taken in the NFL, there's not a lot of close votes. Like they're almost always like 31-1 because
right.
Mike Brown never votes. Whatever it might be. Like groupthink does just take over, and I think that like we said, they can use whatever excuse they want for why they don't want to hire Belichick, but it doesn't look good for all of them. It doesn't look good that this guy left and went to college to a mid-level program while we're watching just like so much bad coaching every week.
Well, I don't think it's a mid-level program anymore with the kind of money they're probably spending. I think that for North Carolina, you always have to look like, why would somebody spend, I don't know how much it's 30 for 3. I saw 50 for 5, whatever it is, plus all the other people in Belichick's life, plus a commitment to NIL. It's probably like $40 to $50 million commitment per year. But when was the last time anyone talked about North Carolina football? Like we just got Drake May from them. And all I read about leading up to Drake May is like, we have no idea how good he is because his team was such dog shit in his last year, right? So that's who you're getting. So this writer named Ollie Conley, who's I think does a good job, and he was on some of the reporting on this, but he wrote a piece today about when Bill Walsh went back to Stanford and how badly it went. And it went badly for a bunch of different reasons. College football was totally different back then. Walsh maybe didn't have the stamina or the motor that he thought he did. He tried to bring an NFL mindset and it just went badly. There was a book written about it. And, I've been really like Stuart Mandel of The Athletic wrote a piece like, this is going to be a disaster. Like he was just like, mark my words, come back here in 2 years. This is going to be a disaster. I don't know whether I'm just like a Belichick junkie at this point or a Belichick apologist. Like, I don't know. I watched him do so many great things. I just really find it hard to believe he's going to go to college and not be good. And yet the track record says that he won't be good. So where do you stand?
My gut tells me he'll do pretty well there. Now, look, I don't know what that means. Does that
Yeah,
mean they make the playoffs? I don't exactly know. But I think when you have a legend who still feels like he has something to prove and
right.
is really sharp, I think history usually lends itself pretty well to those guys. And I think that clearly this was a space that in 2024 really just started to appeal to him. And like from the people I've talked to closest to him, again in September when they started these meetings and they're going through all these games, I don't think that they were thinking like what college program might come open that would be cool. It was really as the season went on and he became more intrigued with the college game that he asked these guys to look into some of these programs a little bit more. Well, what would it look like if we took my methodologies and tried to adapt them to this? How would that go? And is the ability to knowing that I'll be able to win or lose on my own terms worth the risk of not interviewing or
Yeah,
taking a
hoping that
job before
Dallas
any
or
of these NFL
Cincinnati.
jobs,
Yeah.
before any of those jobs come open, and it was really kind of a resounding yes.
There was one thing that I read in some of the stuff that's been written about this already is with this college job, what he wants to do at North Carolina, I thought was fascinating, where he basically wants to turn it into this football factory that trains people to go to the NFL. So this is something Calipari tried to do at Kentucky, right? This was a big part of their mindset of like college sports is changing. The one and done era is coming. We are going to be this factory that sends people into the lottery, top 5 pick, whatever you want to be. We're going to train you to do that. And if you look at the success of the Kentucky guys that came in the NBA, like there's other reasons for that. There were other people that were involved in that kind of chain, like people like World Wide West, who's now one of the people on the Knicks. But a lot of those Kentucky people did come into the league positioned to succeed, and they did. And they've had the most success, I think, of any college the last 15 years. So when I read that about Belichick, I was like, that's interesting that he's trying to reinvent himself basically as, using North Carolina, awesome school, like one of the top 25 colleges probably. ACC, you have a natural rival in Duke. You get to play big games. You have a chance to make the playoffs. But big picture, hey, if you want to play in the NFL, you're going to learn stuff here that maybe other places it won't be the same. That makes sense to me. Now, whether he can sell that to some 17-year-old kid and some, and their parents in Memphis, Tennessee, or, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, wherever he goes to recruit, I don't know if that's going to work, but it makes sense to me.
It's a pretty good pitch. And I also think that it'll be interesting to see, which NFL teams end up drafting out of that program most. Like, when he had the first run with the Patriots, when they win 3 out of 4 Super Bowls, and then his system got rated around the NFL, he had some tough drafts there. And one of the reasons was because all of a sudden, what felt like half the league was looking for the type of player that only he was looking for before. And so all of a sudden there was a premium on those types of players. Now, who knows exactly? I mean, it would be interesting to see like if the Chargers, if the Ravens, if
teams that he has connections with?
Yes, teams that he would have connections with, the Giants, Denver. If like those types of players, those types of teams end up really looking hard at North Carolina players and wanting them because they'll have a better sense that they're mentally equipped to handle the rigors of the NFL. Name another coach who can get you ready for it. I think that Jim Harbaugh at Michigan could probably do it pretty well, but name another coach who you can say, I will prepare you for what life is like in this league. And it's, as we all know, that goes way beyond schematics in doing your job. It is a complete lifestyle change. Everyone talks about it, how different it is when football ceases to be, your quote unquote job and becomes your real job. And I think that he'll enjoy doing that. Like years ago, it was in 2006. It was around the time the Halberstam book came out. Bill wouldn't promote it during the year, but in the off season, he did a couple events. And he did one at Southern Connecticut, and he received like a distinguished speaker award, and I went to it. And I was really curious on how it was going to go. And he was so at ease in that audience in front of those young minds. And, he wasn't talking about football. He showed some clips. He kind of went to the film in kind of a funny way, but he wasn't like talking about football and using these kind of flat metaphors for how it prepares you for life and this type of thing. He was actually addressing these kids in terms of their passion and what they want to do and how best to do it. And he was just on fire and he was inspiring. And I do think that that's probably a muscle that he hasn't had a chance to flex as much in the NFL. And I think that he'll really look forward to doing that because he'll know that the vast majority of even his players won't play in the pros. But I think that he'll enjoy preparing these people for life beyond football, which, to be honest, it is even though we know that he can do that, it is surprising for Belichick because he's someone whose self-worth almost seems tied to, the results of games.
Yeah, it made sense to me that he went to a school that actually is a strong academic school. Because the other way this could have gone that wouldn't have shocked me is if he just took over, I don't know what jobs are open, but Amherst, Williams, Harvard, Yale, one of those, just he went full Div 3. Now that would have been tougher for all the people he's bringing with him. And I don't know if there's the same amount of money, but the North Carolina, Duke, that kind of level of really good schools that also have football at a pretty competitive level. It makes sense to me. Now, the thing he has to deal with here is if he's grumpy curmudgeon Belichick, every single person he's coaching is on a 1-year deal with this new college system. And that balance, that's why we've seen a bunch of coaches get out. They didn't want to deal with it, right? He's approaching it fresh, but that's the biggest X factor to me, right? He's yelling at whoever and they're just like, okay, cool, I'm going to be at Ohio State next year.
So college is kind of a combination, and maybe it's unofficially always been this way, of raw NIL money and how much am I getting, and cult of personality. I mean, you see it with Deion Sanders. It is just such a cult of personality.
Yeah.
Even Saban, he had reached that level, and I think that it's kind of interesting to consider. But I mean, it's Belichick has reached a higher cultural place than any football coach over the last 2 decades.
I would hope so.
And for as a cult of personality type of guy, I mean, you knew when Kraft started marketing the hoodies with the sleeves cut off, that something had changed in the atmosphere. And a lot of the players that he'll be recruiting won't know. They wouldn't have been born when he was winning Super Bowls with the Patriots. But I think that the cult of personality will be strong with him. And I think that that affords you a lot of the things that if you're a good coach at a good program, makes this job so difficult. Because I don't think that he's going to be married to his phone all day, texting every single position and making sure that they're not entering the portal after practice, metaphorically speaking.
Right. Well, I'll tell you this. He's going to be going against certain coaches that he's going to be so overqualified competitively that it's going to be kind of hilarious. And I'm in the camp of, I think he's actually going to do really well because just like his attention to detail and the game management stuff he'll be able to do is going to be so far superior to some of these dudes that are in college. That's one of my frustrations when I watch college is I can't believe how sloppy and dumb and stupid some of the stuff is, especially late. But here's what
just imagine someone like Dabo Sweeney. I mean, just he's clearly an elite college coach.
Yeah.
That doesn't run the most sophisticated offense. And, I think that when Deshaun Watson came into the NFL, I think Bill O'Brien did a great job with him. And Deshaun for a while there was on the verge of being one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, they had to mesh a lot of what they did in Clemson with the stuff, pulling from the Brady rookie playbook, right?
Yeah.
of the Patriots offense. And, he will take that stuff as a huge challenge. I mean, the fact that you essentially have, great inflation in college with some of these quarterback numbers that are being put up. I mean, He will take that stuff personally. But there's also that aspect to the fact that he is who he is. And I mean, Brady on Fox the other day was asked about Belichick in college, and he just like could not imagine him there. And it's a funny clip of him doing his impression of Bill giving his pitch. Well, we don't really want you, but if you want to come here, we'll see what you can do. I mean, that part of it is really kind of interesting because he's going to be the complete opposite of what every other kid hears.
Yeah, it's basically he's Bobby Knight in the modern era.
Exactly.
So if it's over, 302 wins for the NFL, third all time. 31-13 in the playoffs, not including 13 byes. So 31-13 plus the byes, he's basically 44-13. 333 combined wins. Only Don Shula had more at 347. 6-3 in Super Bowls, 3 more as an assistant, so 9 total. And really the only person with a chance to catch him with any of this stuff seems to be Andy Reid, who is 32 wins behind him and 5 playoff wins behind him, and is probably going to pass him. And I'm sure Belichick's probably okay with it.
And I wondered if that factored into it, where he's like, even if I go to Jacksonville and I coach 2 years and get the record, am I going to hold it for? Remember when Drew Brees was breaking all those records, and you knew that he was only going to have them until Brady, another half season. I wonder if that calculus went into things. Is that worth it for me?
Probably not. I mean, if it was Philly, if Sirianni went sideways and he's moving in midseason, but I talked to his people about him doing a podcast like with Ringer, Spotify, because they talked to everybody last year, and one of the things they made very clear to everybody who was discussing any sort of media thing with him is Belichick will be coaching in February, right? It's like, keep it low, but this is a 1-year thing. This is not a new career. He's doing this for 1 year. He will be coaching in February. And I always thought that was interesting that they're so honest about it. And just like, he clearly wanted to do all the media stuff because he wanted to make money. But he was also trying to shift some sort of perception about him. And I think for the most part, it worked. Because I think if you think about him in July, people just knew him as the all-time coach curmudgeon we've ever had. Not the same now, I don't think. Like, he's inside the NFL, his humor came out a little bit. The Manning cast, there were some pretty dreary moments in the Manning cast, but there were also some fun clips too.
And some edgy moments. So you get to see that edginess with him sometimes.
Yeah, he would do that Jim Gray podcast sometimes, and he'd start throwing darts at coaches and stuff occasionally. So there was a little more, I think, that most people thought, but for people like you and me who had been watching him forever, like, none of it was surprising. It backed up everything we'd already heard. But I always felt like his sense of what his place was in football history and how he could shape that a little bit. I always thought he was way more aware of that. You don't let Halberstam do a biography of you. You don't let the NFL film crew follow you around for a year. Like, he did care about that stuff, I think, a little more than people realize, right? That was always my take.
Absolutely. I mean, legacy has always been important to him, and not just his legacy, but the legacy of the things that he built. I mean, I always was told that, like, back when he thought he would always leave the Patriots on his terms, he would never leave it if they were down. Like, he always wanted to hand over the team, a good team, to his successor. Yep. So that, like, no matter what you said about him, you could always say that he made decisions that he thought were in the best interest of the team, not himself, but the team and the franchise. And that was a lasting legacy beyond him, on the sidelines. And watching him this year, and even he was throttled. You could tell there was moments where maybe he would have gone there a little bit more, but he had to restrain himself a little bit because he knows that he still wants to get back in, and he's not quite done with this, and it's not quite his personality just to rip guys on
that was my
television.
Fear with him doing a podcast with us.
Like,
yeah. How far is he going to go? Is he going to hold back?
But the gap between him and most of the league was just painfully obvious. And I get all the reasons that I think there's a lot of people who thought that, like, remember when Mike Shanahan sat out a year and teams started to fire their coaches early so they could get the inside track on him?
Yeah.
There was a sense that might happen with Belichick, but because of the rules that are in place, that never really happened. And plus, I think owners just had, like we've talked about, all their reasons, as valid or not as they may be, of why they would rather bring in someone else. And it's kind of hard not to be happy for Belichick, and that he's landed in a place that he seems legitimately stoked about.
Yeah, and even the Crafts, they did end up with Drake May somehow, right? They probably have one of the 4 worst coaches in the league. They have one of the worst front offices in the league that just had a horrible draft and a horrible free agency. But they do have this guy now who has a chance to be one of the 5 or 6 best QBs in the league. And the whole fan base is completely in on him. And now it's become, I look at it and I'm just like, Vrabel's sitting there. Like, I don't understand. If you go back and you look at Vrabel's Tennessee career, in 2021, he was 12-5. And go look at that team. Like, it's kind of like about to be washed up. Maybe already was. Tannehill. Derrick Henry plays half the season. A.J. Brown is about to get traded for Treylon Burks, straight up. Or Trayvon Burks, whatever his name is. And they overachieve with that team. And then they trade Brown. QB situation goes sideways. Vrabel starts, battling the front office, and he's gone. And now he's just sitting there. And to me, like what we were talking about earlier about Harbaugh, Peyton, there's just like 7, 8 coaches, Tomlin, 7, 8 coaches that really matter. I think Vrabel's one of the 7 or 8. You have Drake May. I don't understand if these last 4 games for the Pats don't go badly. If they go badly, just admit the mistake and hire Vrabel. He's a Patriot Hall of Famer. I think he'd come. Why wouldn't they do it?
Well, a couple things. I think that, first of all, Vrabel is suffering from a little bit of the same thing that Belichick has. This perception that you got to give him the keys and let him do it his way. I think that guy's an excellent, excellent coach. I actually think that, it's obvious that Tennessee was better under him and they were tougher under him. I actually think that if you are trying to develop Will Levis, he was better for that because he knew how to protect quarterbacks.
Right.
Like, he knew how to run an offense that didn't put everything on them and took some of the pressure off. And I think he's suffering from a little bit of the stuff you see from Belichick. Would the Crafts move on from Gerard Mayo? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I think Kraft has said publicly that he decided in 18 or
5 years ago,
17, somewhere around that time that he was going to succeed Belichick. And it's, unless there's something that's going on in the building that's so dysfunctional that hasn't come out yet, that is just beyond intolerable, I would really have a hard time seeing Robert Kraft, move on from a coach like that after 1 year.
I agree. And yet, I do feel like this is one of those situations where from everything we've seen this first year, there's really no glimmer of hope so far with the coach and the coaching staff and really any piece of this. And now it's like, well, so now we're going to run, and then a year from now we'll change everything. That's why these next 4 games. Well, these next 4 games are going to be so important because like Arizona this weekend is a winnable game for them. Arizona, I think, has overachieved a little. They're not that talented. They're, from a talent standpoint, not like crazy different than the Pats. And May might be able to just beat them by himself. But if they play Buffalo twice, I forget who the last game is, but I feel like if they go 0-4 and it's like a bad 0-4, I'm prepared for anything. Because Kraft's old. These owners get old and they're like, fuck it. I'm in my 80s. Like, I don't want to go down this way.
And plus with Vrabel, as prickly as he can be, they're used to that. Like, they're like, whatever. Like, whatever, Tennessee can't handle, they're like, it's fine with us. This is a beach. Like, we've been through worse.
Right.
And he's, and he's a good coach. He's a really good coach. It's a real.
Well, the funniest thing to me is why Chicago wouldn't hire him. And it's like they're enamored with Ben Johnson. He calls great plays. It's like, how much evidence do we need that might not be the deciding reason to hire a coach? Like, in the last 15 years, Kyle Shanahan is the only real whiz kid new coach. Even somebody like McVay, who I think gets credit for that. McVay's a football coach. He's doing everything on all sides. He's a people manager. He's a strategist. He's not just like, here are my 50 plays I'm bringing into the game. Vrabel is like a culture changer. Chicago needs to, they play in the worst weather probably in the league, other than maybe two other cities. Like they need to be like tougher on the lines. They need to be able to protect Caleb. I don't understand how just hiring a play caller is going to be the answer for them. But what do I know?
Absolutely, and it's a little bit like Belichick. I mean, he's a total head coach. He
Yeah,
can go coach running backs if he needs to. And Vrabel is a very similar. He learned, from him and others, but like Vrabel is a total head coach. I'll never forget Belichick's last playoff game. I guess we're saying the last playoff game with Brady.
yeah,
When they lost to the Titans at home on that rainy night, and you know the Patriots need the ball back. They get a stop, and you're thinking this is when we've seen this.
yeah,
All of a sudden they're going to turn it on, and Vrabel deploys that clock management trick that Belichick had used against the Jets
yeah,
earlier that year. And Belichick's just going nuts on the sideline and melting down, and you can tell he is hot because. But Vrabel had learned, like he had studied the guy, and he knew
yeah,
in the exact situation when to use that. That is next level coaching. And when you watch, like again, the end of like the Bears Lions game, which is just like a debacle on every front, it's just obvious that there are some of these guys out there that are fundamentally coaching and teaching a different sport, and others are just kind of glorified play callers. And that would be my concern with Ben Johnson, even though he's an imaginative play caller.
yeah. Sal and I talked about it a little on Sunday. I just think being a head football coach and being somebody who specializes on one side of the ball or the other over and over again, I would just rather have the overall head coach like Kevin Clark wrote a really good piece for us on The Ringer. I think it was for the 23 season about Vrabel and all the stuff that he did for the Titans. And people can go back and read it, but just about how he would grab different time with different, he'd just be like, oh, I'm going to spend a half hour with the left guard because I don't like the way that he's stepping back on just every aspect of the team. And I think for the Patriot fans, like the stuff we read and hear about Mayo, like it just doesn't seem like that's happening. Not to mention the media stuff's been bad. The game management stuff's been bad. The team is exceptionally sloppy. And I'm waiting for a light at the end of the tunnel with him because it would be a hell of a lot easier for all of us if he was a good coach or had a chance to be a good coach. But these next four games are going to determine it. All right. So you announced you have a new book coming in September. It's called American Kings, Biography of the Quarterback, available for pre-order now. And you just used your massive media clout to just go get time with a bunch of famous quarterbacks and find out what's going on with that position,
including Drake May. But yeah, I want to write a book that takes the most encompassing look at this position I possibly could. What's it like to do at every one of these levels? What does it build in you? What does it strip away? What is it like doing in high school, college, as a rookie? How did this thing become cool? The answer, as it turns out, goes back to 1885 and runs right through LA in the coming decades.
Wow.
And, then what is it like to live with this the rest of your life? In what ways is it incompatible with kind of future happiness? That's what I wanted to do. And yeah, I spent some time with your boy, Drake May, when he was at Carolina, and his family and the coaching staff there at the time. And I really enjoyed, spending time with him. And I do think that like part of the reason he was appealing to the Patriots, there's a Brady factor there where it's like you had the youngest kid in a family of achievers who had to fight for attention.
Yeah.
And, when he decided to go to North Carolina, he knew, right then that like, it's not about whether you make it in the NFL or not. It's actually just whether you have something to say at Thanksgiving with your family around. Did you do something that year that lets you be part of that conversation? And anyway, I had a great time reporting it and working on it, and looking forward to September.
Yeah, I obviously was obsessed with that draft in April and reading everything, talking to as many people as I could talk to, and I was so all in on May. But Manning, ironically, I was at a thing with him and I was just picking his brain because he knew May a little bit, and I was like, I really feel like May's the guy, and Manning was like, oh yeah, that guy's the man. Like that guy's going to be really good. I was like, really? Like I was like a little kid. Really? You think he's going to be good? But I do think part of, and I'm sure your book taps into that, is how the guys who have done it can spot things with the next guys. Like, oh, like they just kind of know who has and who doesn't. And it's been the opposite of some of the other people we've had in different sports over the years. May's he's checked every box. It's crazy. Like he even knows what to say in the press conferences already. It's nuts.
He has. And I mean, I think that, like, to take back what you said, I mean, I think there's an element of it where, they think they can, and then sometimes they can't too. So, like, what makes this job and these weird responsibilities it has so unique and so hard, so mythologized and so hard to predict baffles these guys. I mean, Steve Young loved Zach Wilson, mentored him.
Right.
And,
what happened?
What happened?
What happened to Sam Darnold? How does he go from it? That's the thing. I think situations, so much of it, which is why the Drake May thing has been amazing, because he's in a bad situation. He's got bad receivers and a bad offensive line, and it doesn't seem like his coaching staff's that great, although Van Pelt might be all right. But Darnold, holy shit, you look back at the situation he was in, it was like, of course he wasn't going to succeed, especially at the age he was at. Anyway.
And to tie it all back, Belichick used Darnold to take another crack at the Jets.
Oh yeah, he loved that. He's done that a few times.
He loved mentioning that every team wanted to keep Darnold and liked him except for the Jets. So
right. All right. Well, I look forward to reading that book. It's a great idea. Seth, awesome to see you. Read his piece today if you want even more information on this. But I hope all is well.
Thanks, man. Good to see you.